I'm gonna tell you something that I've never told anyone before.
Okay.
Video essay YouTuber.
This session's over.
Dexter Morgan, blood analyst by day, blood speller by night. He's a man who lives by a code, a strict one, a clear one that claims to give his violence purpose, and yet, like so many of history's so-called monsters, he's constantly asking himself, why do I do this? What am I really? Am I in control or just pretending to be human? The answers to these questions take us not only into Dexter's fractured psyche, but straight into the heart of a deeper philosophical labyrinth, one mapped by the German madman Friedrich Nietzsche, guided by the authoritarian shadows of Thomas Hobbes, and haunted by the psychological archetypes of Carl Jung called the shadow. Dexter isn't just a killer of a conscience, he's the byproduct of a philosophical crisis. What happens when morality collapses, when we have killed God and are left to invent meaning on our own? Let's start with someone even more misunderstood, Frankenstein's creature. The creature never even gets a name. From the moment he's brought into this world, he's rejected. By Victor, by society, by everyone who sees his face. But the thing is, he didn't start out evil. In fact, he starts off as innocent, curious, even kind. What he becomes, the vengeful, violent, monstrous entity, is the result of neglect, isolation, and an overwhelming sense that he was created with no love or purpose. Dexter is also born in blood. He watches his mother with a chainsaw when he's just a child, sits in her blood for 2 days before he's found. He's adopted, yes, but not healed. Instead, his new father, Harry Morgan, a police officer, sees the signs early. So Harry teaches him the code, a rigid surgical framework that says you can kill, but only kill the guilty. In other words, don't become a monster, become a functional one. But what happens when a code meant to preserve your humanity ends up destroying it? Harry Morgan isn't evil. In fact, he tries to save Dexter in the only way he knows how, control. He doesn't want Dexter in prison or dead. He wants him to survive and to direct his violence toward people who deserve it. But here's where the real problem begins. Harry, like Victor Frankenstein, is a creator who takes no real responsibility for what he's made. He gives Dexter structure, not love. He doesn't try to understand Dexter's pain. He just tries to make that pain useful. Harry trains Dexter to fake human emotion, to smile, to nod, to say the right things in social settings, but he never teaches him how to feel. So Dexter becomes a kind of hollow echo of a human being. Just like Frankenstein's creature, he performs humanity, hoping that someone, someday, might actually see the real him and not scream in horror. This recalls the political philosophy of Thomas Hobbes, who believed that without structure, society would fall into chaos, a war of all against all. Hobbes' Leviathan is a sovereign force that imposes order, suppressing our brutish, selfish instincts. Harry, in this metaphor, becomes Dexter's personal Leviathan, instilling law where love should have been. But Hobbes thought society's rules were supposed to protect life, not distort it. And what Harry creates isn't peace but repression, a monster who doesn't understand his own hunger, only how to hide it. Hobbes' philosophy emphasizes that life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and thus people submit to an absolute power to escape this chaos. But Dexter's story shows a twisted version of this. Harry's code is a less sovereign power that protects social order and a more rigid case that forces Dexter to deny his essential nature. This leads to the repression of his desires and emotions, creating a dangerous split between his public persona and private self. His true self becomes fragmented and hidden, a prisoner of his own making. Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher and critic of conventional morality, famously declared that God is dead, a very misunderstood statement. It wasn't a literal statement, but a cultural one. In the wake of Enlightenment rationalism and scientific progress, he argued that traditional Judeo-Christian morality had lost its metaphysical foundation, and with the death of God came a terrifying freedom. We must now create our own values. What he preached instead of traditional morality, which he called Sklavenmoral or slave morality, was master morality, a kind of self-created value system where the individual asserts their own power, their own instincts and their own meaning without reference to anyone else's rules. The Ubermensch or overman rises above good and evil. He creates his own code. He doesn't follow society's laws. He's not interested in guilt or redemption in the traditional sense. He kills because it satisfies an urge, and the code gives him a framework to do it, morally. He is the judge, jury, and executioner of that logic. Killers, that's his truth. But there's a catch. Nietzsche's Ubermensch is supposed to be life-affirming, overflowing with creative energy and self-assertion. Dexter isn't that. He's a man running from himself, hiding behind Harry's code. The code doesn't free him, it imprisons him. He hasn't transcended traditional morality. He's clinging to a new dogma just as restrictive as the old. And like Frankenstein's creature, he begins to ask, who made me this way? Who am I without this? In this sense, Dexter's Code is a pale shadow of Nietzsche's true vision. Nietzsche warned against blindly adopting any set of rules, even one's own, because true freedom comes from the continuous act of creating and recreating oneself, not following a fixed code. Dexter's rigidity represents a failure of self-overcoming. He's trapped in a cycle of violence, justified by rules, rather by a dynamic, evolving will to power. This internal crisis is what Carl Jung called confrontation with the shadow. The dark, repressed parts of ourselves that we bury, disown, or disguise. Dexter's shadow isn't just his urge to kill, it's his desire to be seen, to be known, to be loved despite the darkness. The more he suppresses this shadow through the rigidity of the code, the more it controls him. Individuation, the Jungian process of becoming a whole self, requires facing the shadow, not covering it in ritual and rationalization. For Jung, the shadow is not inherently evil. It's simply the part of the personality the conscious ego refuses to acknowledge. Dexter's refusal to accept his full self leads to disintegration, a split between his public mask, the family man, the blood analyst, and his secret identity. This fragmentation causes psychological turmoil. His inability to integrate his shadow manifests in paranoia, emotional detachment, and existential despair. Moreover, Dexter's interactions with Deborah, Rita, and his own son reflect moments when the shadow threatens to break through. These relationships challenge his compartmentalized existence, forcing him to confront emotions he cannot easily suppress. His failure to fully embrace his shadow and thus move forward toward the Jungian wholeness traps him in a cycle of repetition-compulsion, forever haunted by unresolved inner conflict. Let's pause for a moment. Nietzsche is one of the most influential philosophers of all time. But he also went mad, literally. By the end of his life, he was writing letters to imaginary emperors, signing them Dionysus or the Crucified. His philosophy is often brilliant, but it's also dangerous. He invites you to burn down the old world, but he doesn't give you much in the way of what comes next. Self-overcoming, Selbstüberwindung, is the Nietzschean ideal, the process by which you conquer your own limitations, destroy your inherited morality, and forge a new self. But what happens when this process ignores the emotional, communal, and relational needs that make us human? What happens when it becomes pure will, pure instinct, and pure isolation? Well, you get monsters, or at least people who think they are. Dexter's pursuit of self-overcoming through the code is an attempt to escape what he believes is his essential broken nature. But instead of healing, he fragments further. He doesn't become more whole. He becomes more compartmentalized. He isn't rising above morality, he's being crushed by it. The code is no longer a guide, but a coffin. Throughout the series, Dexter is constantly tested. He breaks the code, he kills innocent people, he develops real relationships with Rita, Deborah, and his own son, as I've said before. And each time, the cracks grow wider. The problem isn't that he has a code, it's that the code was built for a machine, not a man. It doesn't account for change, for emotion, for growth. It doesn't allow for human instinct. And when those instincts do break through, love, rage, fear, Dexter doesn't know what to do with them. Frankenstein's creature is no different. He too begs for love, for companionship. He asks Victor to make him a mate. When Victor refuses, the creature doesn't just explode, he collapses in despair. He becomes violent because he is unacknowledged, unseen, and unloved. His creator gave him form, but not meaning. Just like Harry gave Dexter rules, but no connection. In both cases, the monsters aren't born, they're made. They're the result of creators who failed to finish the job. Harry built a cage for Dexter's instincts, but never helped him build a bridge to his humanity. Victor stitched together flesh, but forgot to nurture a soul. And Nietzsche offered the will to power, but ignored the need for belonging. So who's really to blame? Dexter, the creature, Victor, Harry, Nietzsche? Well, the truth is that It's complicated. Dexter and the creature are not simply killers or villains. They're reflections of failed responsibility. They are what happens when we try to control darkness instead of understanding it, when we replace compassion with rules. And Nietzsche, for all his brilliance, gave us a philosophy that is awe-inspiring in its ambition, but terrifying in its possible consequences. If you tell people to create their own values without helping them build connection, empathy, or love, you don't really get Ubermensch. You get lonely men with strict codes, slowly breaking under the weight of their own moral architecture. Frankenstein's creature dies unnamed, still yearning. Dexter's story continues with the same question: was I ever anything more than what they made me? Because in the end, the real horror isn't the blood or the violence. It's the silence that follows when the code fails and you're left with nothing but yourself. Also, if you could please subscribe, it would really help me.